So I love you.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metro Saint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metro Saint General Insurance Company.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Let's Get Down to Business. Special because I have a special guest, and also special because we are at our 42nd year as a nation. You'll meet my guests when we come back.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metro Saint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metro Saint General Insurance Company.
This is Let's Get Down to Business. As I promised you, I have a very special guest. He's none other than Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We're going to have a little look at where we are today after 42 years of independence. Prime Minister Gonsalves, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and good day to all our citizens and residents.
So, this program is being pre-recorded, of course, but by the time it airs, we'll be into just about our 42nd year of independence. As Prime Minister, how does it feel, in a sentence or two, how does it feel to be Prime Minister at this time?
It's a time of great challenge, and therefore, at a personal level, it's something which pumps your creative juices. And because the pieces are so disparate and moving, and there is great unpredictability, the times are uncertain, they're perilous, but within the uncertainty and the peril of the times, there is a resilience of our people, their possibilities and strengths amidst all the limitations inside of our country, and also the connections with our regional family and the global world. So that the complexities of the current situation demand that we fashion a stronger social solidarity to get things done. At precisely the time when over the last several decades, and particularly in the last 20 or 30 years, that we find there is a focus on the me, on the I, on a kind of atomized individualism engendered by modern technology, by people can move wherever they want to move, global capitalism in a sense. But these times cannot be accommodated within the frame of an atomized individual. That is to say, an individual as individual, but a time which demands greater social solidarity.
Yes.
So amidst all the uncertainties and the contradictions, you have to fashion this path with creativity, and we have to have faith. We have to accompany the faith with works, and we have to deliver quality leadership. So I end where I began.
Excellent. So let's remind people of where we were before 42 years ago and the time leading up to that. I'm going to ask you again, and you know, I'm sorry to say we have to be brief because we have to contain this in an hour. But if you were to compare, or if you were to write a novel of our journey leading up to this point where we are 42 years as a nation, who would you identify as the protagonist in your novel?
The protagonists are not flesh and blood. The protagonists are systems of inequality globally, unequal trade, the inheritance, the legacy of underdevelopment bequeathed to us through a number of circumstances, including native genocide, the enslavement of African peoples in our country, in our region, and colonialism, despite its contributions in a few eras. When colonialism took us out of the vortex of an autonomous path and put us in a subjugated condition, it led us into a dead end, despite the fact that, as I've said, there were contributions made, important contributions by colonialism. But if you look at the material level of living of our people, you would see that, take water and electricity.
Right.
Maybe 1/3 of the people had electricity and water
At the time.
before independence. It's now 90-odd%, and high quality also, and reliable. Education, you know, there were large numbers of people didn't even complete primary school. Now you have universal secondary education,
right,
and you have a move towards one university graduate, one post-secondary graduate, community college, university per household by 2030, and we are on target for that. Housing, the level of living generally, far advanced. But at the same time, peculiarly, there has been a fracturing of that social solidarity which I've been talking about.
So you think that fracturing actually take us, or threatens to take us back to those dark days? The days, I call them dark, but the days leading up to our sovereignty and being a nation.
No, I don't think it's the same thing, because there are always counterbalancing factors. Technology, for instance, modern science.
Right.
Look, Tony, in the year at independence, the average lifespan of a Vincentian male at birth was 60 plus.
Right.
Now it is 74 years. And that has had to do with developments in modern science and health.
And knowledge. People getting knowledge about themselves and
plus,
how to.
Plus, of course, the policies of successive governments since independence, or just before independence.
As you talk about successive governments, if we're still in the pre-independence time, so let's move now to the early post-independence period and leading up to now. If you to talk about successive governments, there have only been 3. Right?
Yes.
What would you say were their successes? I know you were alluding to some of them, but I want you to be specific regime-wise, okay? Milton Cato's Labour Party, James Mitchell's NDP, and now you, okay? How effectively, efficaciously have they addressed the imperatives of development that were laid out before them? I'll contextualize it.
Yes, before I answer that, let me just say I'd indicated that there were some bequests of colonialism which have served us pretty well.
Okay.
For instance, a more or less independent public service, professional group of people, the common law, an independent judiciary, and the English language. Now, we didn't have to have native genocide and the enslavement of Africans to have those positives.
Right.
I'm not doing a ticking in an accounting sense.
And either or.
I'm just seeking to be objective and provide a backdrop.
Right.
Now, the Milton Cato of blessed memory, James Mitchell, and Ralph, and there was Arnhem for a short period of time, 5 months, which was really the tail end of Sir James's administrations. Each of the leaders was faced with circumstances which they had to address, which had similarities but profound differences. You know, C.L.R. James in the Black Jacobins, following upon an observation made by Karl Marx in the 18 Brumaire of Louis Napoleon in the mid-19th century, said that men make history, and that includes women. Men and women make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them so to make.
Right.
So the simple point which you highlighted there about the context, the circumstances.
Yes.
Milton Cato, it was his historic mission as the father of independence to lay a basis for a modern liberal democratic state. He had to consolidate, deepen, extend some of the democratic features of the earlier immediate pre-independence period, but at the same time to dilute or retreat from what you may call gubernatorial overrule, governor type rule, colonial governor type rule. And he had to build institutions, build on the public service, build on the judicial system. Well, that in a sense was being shaped regionally,
yes,
through the West Indies Associated States, and then, of course, subsequently under his own watch in 1981, the founding of the OECS, and therefore the OECS Supreme Court.
Right.
He had to be involved in picking up the pieces, so to speak, after the collapse of the Federation and the arrival of Carifta and then CARICOM in 1973.
And he was doing all of this while neighboring islands were going through similar transformation.
Of course, Sir James, in the pre-independence period, when he was premier for a short period of time, 2.5 years, had to grapple with some of these issues too. And to discover that you can't get something called granting aid anymore, because that was a colonial type arrangement, and you have to build all the basis for your foreign policy, all of these things. Plus, Milton Cato had to see how he could diversify the economy, and here the leadership in the ministry as a public servant of Sims Martin of blessed memory was of great importance in laying out a frame for I don't want to trivialize it by calling it industrialization by invitation, but to build up the small manufacturing sector while taking advantage of the beneficial trading arrangements, the cocoon trading arrangements with bananas.
And
so on. And so James also had that particular quote-unquote advantage, but which turned out to be a mirage in later years, because we were not as prepared as we should have been for the end of those arrangements in Europe. So that was Milton Cato's mission.
Right. So let's just pause it there, go to the break. When we come back, I think you're going to pick up with the NDP show and Sir James. You're looking at Let's Get Down to Business, more with the Honorable Prime Minister when we come back from the break.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrocent General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocent General Insurance Company.
So the reason why we in healthcare use this mask, the N95 mask, is because we have a prolonged contact and continuous contact with the ill. A prolonged contact is considered within 1 meter of the patient and for more than 15 minutes. And you know, healthcare workers, we would have to keep doing this. Also, we'll be doing aerosolized procedures. We may have to nebulize someone, so we need a little bit more protection. And that's why we use the N95 mask. While caring for someone at home, always remember, even though you're using this mask, that your contact should really be minimal. And it does protect you in the case of corona because the virus is quite big and very unlikely to pass to and from this mask. And that's why the patient would wear it and the person providing care will wear it.
This is Let's Get Down to Business. Let's Get Down to Business is a collaboration between the Chamber of Industry and Commerce and IKTV. My guest on this independent special edition is the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves. PM, let's move on with the...
Yes. So, James Mitchell's administrations over the period 1984 July to when Sir James demitted office in October 2000. That 16-year period. there was a continuation of some of the policies that Milton Cato had shaped. But I think Sir James diverged in some important particulars. And I don't think that it turned out necessarily for the better.
So I'm going to ask you what those are. But before I ask you what those are, just to frame it, under the NDP's period, bananas were very strong.
Yes.
Underpinning the economy by no uncertain terms.
Yes.
I believe it's fair to say that Sir James started to explore tourism, more Grenadines tourism, I suppose, because that's where he saw the nest egg.
Yes. Well, so that's why I say he continued, because Milton Cato had earlier ideas about tourism too, but didn't. He was not as engaged as Sir James was in a different period.
Would you say that Cato was, again, in the context of how he was governing, and in the period, I mean, would you say he was more about policy, setting up institutions, like you said, as opposed to economic?
No. Cato's period as a manager of the economy was pretty good on what he was trying to do. And when you look in retrospect, you will see what his initiatives. And I was going to point this out. Milton Cato was building what you may call the goods sector, agriculture, light manufacturing, and the like. But he saw the importance of services. The Philatelic Bureau, which he set up for stamps. He's the man who set up the international financial sector, the offshore sector. He's the man who did the ship's registry and dealt with not only here but in overseas, in Monaco and the like. So that they were, you can see moving there. But the area of divergence, which I believe is significant, which I said I'm not so sure that it was a correct approach by Sir James to in a sense, move away from some of that. It had to do with the role of the state in the economy. Milton Cato established the National Commercial Bank in 1977. We see where that vision has now led us. The state was the principal driver in the Diamond Dairy, in attempting to revive, and with Vincent Beach of blessed memory, the sugar industry. I just give some examples, but I can do more, and I've analyzed this elsewhere. In fact, all of this I've analyzed in a book which I wrote and caused to be published in 2019, called The Political Economy of the Labour Movement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Looked at the economy from the standpoint of how the labor movement saw this evolution of the political economy from 1763.
You would say Sir James changed direction from the role of the state in
yes, he de-emphasized that particular aspect of it, and he was more in the mold of philosophically of a neoliberal, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, free enterprise. And he was in that period where the Thatcherite, Reaganite, quote-unquote, revolution had inspired the Western world. The collapse of the Soviet Union and centrally planned economies. And there's this move towards the taking the gospel of the Washington Consensus laid down then by the IMF and the World Bank.
The private sector would see that as them being empowered. And I think later on in the program, I'm going to ask you about your private sector policies.
Yes. And that was what Sir James was looking at, except to say that you have to build the private sector in small economies like this, at the same time that you're strengthening the economy as a whole. So there has to be a harmonious integration between the private sector, it's very important, the state sector, and the cooperative sector, in a way in which the whole of that integration between those sectors is so dynamic that it becomes the final product is more than the summation of the individual parts. Because, look, the private sector in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, relatively speaking, the domestic private sector is very much underfunded. You don't have the extent of the capital.
Right. And it comprises largely family businesses.
Yes, and then you bring in, and some of the families have done very well. For instance, the Graves family, that comes to mind, and because they're a progressive people and they're diversifying, and generations are building upon generations, as they say.
Edgy Richard, Sam Goodluck, all these people.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can call them off. Sam and Edgy, very important. So I don't think it's a question of either or. It's a question of how do you get the balance in these circumstances. In other words, you don't have to be, quote unquote, ideological about it.
Right.
For example, Milton Keto laid the basis for the Mustique company.
Right.
Sir James built on that. It's very important. It's a particular kind of a tourism product. And I negotiated two agreements and with the Mustique company, and I brought more benefits to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but building upon the foundations and altering some of the things which I didn't think were in this period were the best things to be done.
And by and large, we have to say Mustique is success story.
By and large, a success story in the economic terms in which we're talking about. And broadly in social terms, in the way in which people have been uplifted, people who have worked there and they've made money and built their own properties, and got some gone into small businesses and the like. So that is the area I see of a distinction between Sir James and Milton Keto. And of course, in small economies, you have to also take some risks. Sir James took a huge risk with the Otley Hall project, and it ended up, it blew up in his face, metaphorically.
Correct. But as you mentioned Otley Hall, and I'm not going to get into the whole story of Otley Hall, but now where we are, and I think you'll appreciate it, we keep going back and forth.
Yes, yes.
But now where we are, there's a lot of talk about the blue economy.
Yes.
Okay? And if you look at Otley Hall now, successfully implemented, we're talking, hypothetically here, successfully implemented, that arguably could be a significant way of addressing that potential in the blue economy.
Well, you see, an idea may be in your head, but that idea has to be grounded in certain reality and how you implement it. You know, I can have the idea in my head that there's nothing called Newton's law of gravity, and that if I go on the top of this building, if I jump, I will fly.
And you'll quickly find out that you can't.
Yes, because the fact is that even before Newton's discovery of the law of gravity, when men jumped, men fell. So there were certain real things you had to take account. And I believe in his earnestness and anxiety to make a move in this direction, a wrong partner was chosen, and maybe he would say, well, that was the only one available for us, because And the jury of history can make a verdict on that. I believe that people contemporarily have made a verdict, but that's not necessarily going to be the final
you talk
verdict.
About taking risk. You have been Prime Minister for 20 odd years now, I think.
Oh, you have to take risks, 20 plus years.
And so you would understand that.
I understand it very well.
Yeah. Did Sir James sufficiently prepare us for the removal of the banana industry, the decimation of it? He must have seen it coming, I'm sure.
I don't think he prepared us well enough for it. And I tell you, look, both the model of Milton Cato and Sir James assumed economic development using unlimited supplies of cheap labor. Now, as the economy diversified into services, and the service economy had become dominant in the latter stages of Sir James's administration, in order to get the best out of services, the service sector, and in order to build a modern, competitive, many-sided post-colonial economy, there are several things you have to do. First of all, you have to have an education revolution. Unless you educate and train people, that is not going to happen. It's a long process. We are beginning to see some of the positive results of that. Right. Secondly, accompanying that, you have to build your public health systems and your health systems generally, and we have been doing that because the person, the individual, that social individual, not an atomized individual, he or she becomes critical in the process of modernizing and developing the economy in a sustainable manner. Then you have to do a number of things in relation to the physical infrastructure. Services, an important area. Tourism, right. You need an international airport here and a jet airport in the Grenadines. Sir James in his book tells us that the government in part disintegrated over the divergent views.
This is the beyond the islands.
Beyond the islands. The question of an international airport. We know all the arguments, and they came very much to the fore. And the other day he wrote a letter pretty much indicating that things fell apart after they did a review in 2020 down in Union Island, a retreat. Now, there's that, and there's Tony. The developments in your field, telecommunication, that's critical. And then, of course, you have to have a modern port. So James saw that importance and realized that Kingstown was not going to serve us into the 21st century. Unfortunately, there was a lack of boldness in that regard. He may say opportunities for resources, that he went to Camden Park and didn't build quite what should have been built.
But he gives this outward, and I know him quite well, right? So he gives this outward image of a risk taker, right?
Yes.
But I'm listening to you, and you are making me believe that you're saying he wasn't risk-taking enough or bold enough in some of the things that he did.
Oh, there are certain areas he wasn't bold enough. And he made a big error in Otley Hall in my view. Because I'm not talking about an idea.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, somebody said to me, it's a good idea, but the only thing was the debt.
What about the Camden Park port?
Yes. I was going to say, you needed something bigger than that, and which is what we're trying to do on the western end of the city.
With your new port project.
With the new port project. But the cost has ballooned so much. I mean, where we thought it was going to be just over $100 million US, it's knocking its head up to $200 million when you begin to see not estimates by consultants, but submissions of bids,
Right.
by real flesh and blood companies, which is where the tire hits the road.
So you have another Argyle International Airport on your hands.
Absolutely. And so, but I'm saying to you, we weren't prepared enough, because the airport we did Canawan, my government did Canawan, we did Argyle, against all kinds of opposition. And then something critical also which had to be done was to unite the country, the north, east of the country, the rest, physical infrastructure, and that involved the Rabica Bridge. And an additional human dimension was the question of housing, in which we have invested.
And of course, in your early days, you had the idea of the cross-country road.
And the cross-country road.
But we're going to pick up more of that when we come back from our break.
Yes.
Quite interesting discussion.
Yes.
I promise you we're going to spend the last two sections on Ralph and the ULP government.
Fine,
okay?
Thanks.
You're looking at Let's Get Down to Business. More with the Honorable Prime Minister when we come back from the break.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs? At Metrocint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocint General Insurance Company.
As a doctor and first responder in the fight against COVID-19, we use the N95 mask to protect ourselves and our patients. We are therefore asking you, the public, not to use or abuse the N95 mask. They are exclusively for medical and nursing personnel. Help us to save you and to save ourselves.
This is Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Of course, this is a special Independence edition. We're into 42 years as a nation. Dr. Gonsalves, and as I say, we're into 42 years as a nation. So in summary, by and large, successive governments have performed reasonably well, you think?
The way I would put it is this, is that between 1979 and the year 2000, or 2001 when we came to office, and between 2001 and today, we have seen significant improvements in people's living standards. So in that regard, Milton Cato made an immense contribution. So too did Sir James in his administration. You take, and of course, I made a point about ours.
Yes.
You can see them in health, in education, in housing, in technology, basically in the lifting of the quality of lives of people. The discussion which we have been having is about where there were successes and where there were possible failures, shortcomings, and the like. And of course, much of what I've said here is looking at the history. It's a short period of time for us to do the historical evaluation. I recall someone once asked, an American once asked a distinguished political leader in France in the latter years of the 20th century. He says, so what's your view of the French Revolution of 1789? And the fellow thought, he's a very thoughtful leader. Mm-hmm. He said, it's too early to say. So I am making the judgment with that caveat.
Based on what we know. But of course, the jury will be long out.
Yes. And I don't want to be unfair to any of my predecessors. No. When we embarked on government in 2001, we didn't think of doing away with what Milton Cato did or what Sir James did. We wanted to build upon those things. And we have done so and moved the country into a different and better direction.
All right. See,
the thing is this: politicians, among some persons, and especially journalists and commentators, they look at politicians as they're a very maligned species. But the truth of the matter is this: in the period between 1979 and today, we have made significant jumps in the quality of our life, living and production than between 1763 and 1979.
Isn't that because in
200 years?
Yeah, because in 1763 to 1979, you're talking about people who had an interest not on the rock that they operated on, but building an empire somewhere else.
That's the point. And we did not benefit from the enormous scientific advances in Western Europe and North America, right, as we are benefiting now. In other words, knowledge is being disseminated, though unevenly, though not in equal measure, much more than before. This is why when anybody asks me about the functions of education, the first thing I normally say, there are several things, but the first one I say, for individuals to receive and transmit universal culture, including science and technology, but with a Caribbean particularity. So this is something of great importance for us to remember,
right,
about the contributions made by the politicians. And sometimes we as politicians, because we are in a competitive situation, we are at each other's throats. And that we often encourage that also, even to the point of busting a man head.
Right.
You know, busting a prime minister head. I mean, it is entirely uncalled for. It is unnecessary. And while you can understand the rough and tumble of competitive politics, there's no doubt that persons have gone beyond.
Emotions run too high.
Beyond the boundaries of what one may consider tolerable or acceptable.
Before I get into the report card of the ULP administration, which is where we're going to go for the rest of this program, Arnhem Eustace,
yes.
Short stint, but what would you say was the impact that he made?
I think that Arnhem's impact as Prime Minister was negligible.
Was it because of the length of time?
Length of time, and Heavenly Father is given a very bad hand politically. The writing was on the wall, and he just couldn't make it. But Arnhem made important contributions as Minister of Finance for the 2.5 years in which he worked. He tried, as you would expect Arnhem, to put some systems in place to strengthen public finance management.
Was he too austere?
Yes. That's my view, and not too conventional, not enough risk-taking. But he did a good job, and he made an important contribution to the country as leader of the opposition. In fact, far superior as a leader of the opposition in terms of his contributions to public debates and making sure that the government will do certain things and to sharpen its own set of responses. Very different than the current lot.
Let's look at the opposition. Let's look at your performance here. After 20 years, I want you to provide some concrete evidence to me that your policies have created economic growth, given the global pressures that creates a drag on how much our economy can grow.
Yes.
Quickly, tell me, because there are quite a few bullet points here.
We have had this particular period of 20 years, perhaps more exogenous shocks, more external shocks than at any period in our history, save and except between the period, I will say, 1881 to 1945.
You're certainly going back in history there.
Yes. And 1881 was basically the collapse of the sugar industry, first time around natural disaster in 1898 with La Soufrière, with the hurricane, a massive hurricane, right. La Soufrière in 1902, another big hurricane in 1926.
And 1945 was the World War.
Then 1929 to 31, the global economic depression.
Right.
1935, as a consequence, the uprising, the anti-colonial uprising. And 1939 to 1945, the World War, the Second World War, and before that, the 14 to 18, the World War and their impacts. So that I look at the history, and that's a period where was extremely challenging also.
So what sectors have we grown? What sectors have we grown in the economy under your
I mean,
what economic sectors?
All of the sectors. The interesting thing, the person may say, but Ralph, how can you say that in relation to bananas? Bananas used to bring in $100 million a year. Well,
at its peak.
At its peak. In 1992, close to $120 million Eastern Caribbean, and then it declined to almost nothingness. And that has to do with the change in the preferential regime. Right. The preferences, the market preferences.
End of subsidies. End of subsidies on the market side, end of subsidies on the supply side.
Absolutely. Clear. But if you look at the numbers, you will see the extent to which agriculture has, if you were to look at the contribution today, you will see about $150 million. Agriculture and fisheries, they go together.
Right.
In the accounting, though, they separate them nevertheless. So that to build back agriculture from the decimation of bananas has been something quite remarkable, and Soboto is doing a splendid job in that regard.
But wouldn't you say there's a lot more potential there, though?
Oh yes. And that is why he's going into areas, not the monocrop situation is no longer available. So you have to look for niches in agriculture, including in marijuana,
right,
medical cannabis. Tourism has advanced and is advancing. Fisheries, the same thing is happening there. Services generally, the area in which there's been a contraction of the extent of the services is in the area of offshore financial services, yes. Because you're faced with a problem. Are you choosing the economy as a whole, or are you going to choose a narrow sector? Mustique, the contribution of Mustique, right, and Canawan. Yes. Mustique far more than Canawan. Canawan used to contribute much more under the previous ownership. Right. And that's a discussion. Yeah, but that can easily change again. That can easily change again. So I think in all of those. What about the contribution in the domestic private sector? Are you seeing growth there? Yes, I also see growth because it's reflected too in the numbers of persons who are employed. The population has not grown much between 1990 and now. Very marginal. Between 1990 and 2001, a little. Between 2001 and 2012, much less. In fact, between 2012 and 2001, the population is pretty much stagnant. And it hasn't grown significantly since then, yet, measured not by any survey which was done, but by the NIS numbers, which are real numbers, persons who are economically active, meaning that they're actively paying NIS contributions. Those numbers have increased significantly. But it's fair to say, too, that more people may be coming from the informal sector into the formal sector, and that's why you're capturing the data more. Yes. There's some of that, and I believe that is partly true. But we still have to acknowledge that you have the NIS estimate that maybe they capture only about 80% of the persons who are economically active and working, but not paying NIS. Right. So and poverty has been reduced. As you bring up poverty, let's look, at your policies. I mean, I'm aware we're going extending this segment here, but let's look at your policies as it relates to social safety nets. How have you performed there? Oh, there are few countries in the region, if any, that have done as well and as innovatively as we have done with in terms of putting social safety nets in place. So much so that our critics are saying that we're spending too much money to help poor people and not making poor people help themselves. That we having a dependency. Is that an unfair criticism? Completely unfair. You can't allow people to suffer and children to suffer. And I don't believe that is making people lazy or less likely to want to do anything. Look, right now, and let us take, even before this period of COVID and La Soufrière eruptions, we expanded significantly the public assistance list, monthly public assistance list. We have increased the payments from $50 a month to $300, way above any inflation. The housing program of all types, highly significant. Yes, special programs such as Yes and Set programs. The home helper for the elderly program. The support systems in education, transportation, the school feeding program, the grants, I mean, there's just simply no comparison between what we are doing now.
How are you financing this?
Well, part of it is from economic activity in which we collect taxes, and part of it from grants from overseas.
Have you lost that Petrocarib?
Oh yes,
facility.
That's a significant loss, because we used to. It ranged between in 1 year. We had about $35 million from Petrocarib. It went down to 10, and then of course the sanctions on Venezuela by the United States of America. Those sanctions have affected us gravely, because you don't have the vessels to bring the oil anymore.
Right.
So that's we are collateral damage, as they say in war.
Just taking out a chunk of
a big chunk. So we but right now, let us just take over the last few days. We put on 3-4 times a year at particular intervals a huge work program, cleaning the roads, debushing and the like. 5,000 something people, nearly 6,000. $2.5 million on this occasion. The most it has ever been under the NDP was $300,000. We just spent that money. We just paid out that money.
Right.
And right at the moment, we are paying out.
So all this is part of your social safety net type activity, your welfare.
Because it is.
It's going to poor people. Poor people being employed.
In some areas it's workfare, in some areas it's welfare.
Okay.
And then we are paying out right now. As I speak, we started on Friday and paying today, paying tomorrow. $5 million to 4,000 farmers. Tony, you're talking within a 10-day period.
Yeah.
$7.5 million
Is that
to 10,000 persons.
Is that payment to farmers an offset for what they suffered in the volcano eruption?
Yes. And we're doing it till the end of the year. Now, right now, 4,000 persons are getting monthly monies through the WFP, World Food Program,
right.
The UN agency which we worked with in having this global appeal. You remember we did that?
Yes.
Plus the other entities, in addition to WFP, UNICEF, Red Cross, the Catholic group, the Seventh-day Adventist group, over 4,000.
So that's what you mean when earlier in the program you're talking about social partnerships, because
social solidarity.
Social solidarity, I mean, because listening to you, a lot of this could not have been achieved were it not for all those things coming into some form of confluence.
Well, in relation to COVID and the volcano, you remember that when the volcano, when we in April, when we had a series of eruptions, April this year, I said with COVID, the volcanic eruptions, and the looming Atlantic hurricane season, that though we have strengths and possibilities internally and resources, the problems confronting us are of such a magnitude that we need to have support from our regional and global families.
We're going to take a pause right there. We'll come back, and no doubt we'll run another extended segment, which will be our last segment. We've come to the end of part 1 of this special edition of Let's Get Down to Business. I'm chatting with the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves. Part 2 when we come back.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrosint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrosint General Insurance Company.
This is part 2 of our special edition of Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Very happy to have you here at this juncture of our history, 42 years of independence, and we're talking about your policies now. I know in the hour or so, because clearly we're going to run beyond an hour, very difficult to get through all that needs to be said. From a policy standpoint, and I'm tying this to the economy and also tying this to sovereignty, there's that controversial initiative that many governments have in the Eastern Caribbean and OECS territories have chosen to pursue citizenship by investment, the sale of passports. You are diametrically opposed to it. Why?
Yes. If I may permit, before I come to this very critical question at this time of independence that you have raised, in tidying up the last few sections, because I had said earlier that Milton Cato and Sir James Mitchell, they pursued economic policies which had at their foundation a model of economic development which rested upon the unlimited supplies of cheap labor, which is a critical factor for colonial economy.
Correct.
I spoke about the differences which they had and how each tried to break out of that vortex. Part of our quest to build a modern, competitive, many-sided post-colonial economy, which is at once national, regional, and global, is to build a sustainable economy on the basis of unlimited supplies of skills and knowledge at a higher level in the division of the international chain of labor. So I think that's
a fundamental difference between the cheap labor and labor that comes with knowledge and skills.
Yes. Now, these are not absolutist categories, but I'm talking where the emphasis is. Now, the Unity Labour Party government is unalterably opposed. We are unequivocally opposed to selling of passports and selling of citizenship. It doesn't matter whether the selling of the passport or selling of the citizenship rides under a rubric, a sanitized rubric called citizenship by investment. Because it is about selling passports and selling citizenship. You can try and sugarcoat that as much as you want. That is what it is. The guy who is coming, the people who are coming,
they're coming for your passport.
They're coming for your passport, they're coming for your citizenship. It's pure and simple. Now, the highest office in the land, the highest office is that of citizens. It is higher than Governor General, higher than Prime Minister. It's not for sale. It's not a commodity. There's too much involved in being a citizen in this. If you sell citizenship, if you sell the passport, you sell citizenship, you can sell anything. And the passport is really, to borrow from the language in the Catholic Church, and from another context, the passport is the outward sign of the inward grace of citizenship.
So you would see that activity as
inimical to sustainable development
and also undermining
social solidarity.
Right, and the 42 years journey that we are on.
Now, if the state can sell things which are so fundamental, why doesn't the person, the individual, sell whatever they have? My body, my choice. Sell it now. Since everything is up for sale. No, you can't put up. There are certain things you do not put up a for sale sign about or for. And it's citizenship and passports. Now, I am not blinded to the fact that you can make some money from it.
A lot of money.
But what does it do to you? And it diverts your attention from real problems. And I'll tell you this. I believe that St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because of the stance it has taken under this government, a lot of support which we receive from a number of different sources, they take those things into account.
So you think it's your principal position?
I have absolutely no doubt about it.
View you through a serious lens.
And that is the way in which the persons from countries all over the world. It's not an accident that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is the smallest country ever to sit on the Security Council. Something happened, not Friday, the Friday before, where you saw St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the African three at the Security Council, Niger, Tunisia, and Kenya. Kenya is the current chair of the Security Council. They're the three non-permanent members from Africa. 1.3, 1.4 billion people. There's 100,000 persons, 110,000 persons country. We led that discussion on Haiti. We drove it. It's the first time in the history of the Haitian problem, before any international council, that the Caribbean, CARICOM, and Africa drove the debate as distinct from a North Atlantic country or group of North Atlantic countries. Haiti is part of CARICOM.
So as you're talking about our seat on the Security Council, let's move right into your foreign policy, your government's foreign policy. And I'll preface this by saying that you have been, at best, controversial in some of the positions you've taken on countries like Venezuela,
yes,
and Cuba.
Yes.
There are people who feel that you stick your neck too far out, okay, and put us at risk of the heavy-handed consequences of the countries like the United States who don't see it the same way you see it.
But that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because every time we take a position, we outline what our position is and we ground our position in international law. You can't go and tell me that in Venezuela that you're going to weaponize the financial system unilaterally because of your power. If you weaponize it in relation to Venezuela and say they can't do certain transactions, you can do that in relation to us too. And if you remain silent, you're complicit in that. Can you be a quote-unquote slave and accept your enslavement without talking about it, without protesting, without raising an alternative, particularly when you're an independent country. There's equality of states at the United Nations. That's what fundamental principle in global bodies, save and except you're equal, but you have the permanent five. So the Security Council.
So the idea of smallness in a small island state does not feature in terms of the bigness of the voice.
No, and the voice, we will articulate our positions. Sometimes when I get our friends from the United States of America or other countries who would call us representatives, and I'd listen. I say, you seriously believe what you're telling me? I say, come on. What about these issues? The right of non-interference and non-intervention in a country's internal affairs. Look, since the Treaty of Westphalia at the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648, when the notion of the state as a critical player in international relations came to the fore, as the foundation upon which the initiators of the United Nations in 1945 in San Francisco. That is the basis. You want to tell me that for the vagaries of this or that political movement, you must abandon those principles? I say absolutely not.
How well are you supported by counterparts in CARICOM? Is there totally oneness in this, or are there people who...
Every country in CARICOM makes the articulation similarly, non-intervention and non-interference. But it is up to you to make your judgment as to whether or not they all followed those formal declarations.
Well, you would say you're the most vocal. I think it's fair to say that.
Well, the point is this. I don't intend to be the most vocal. I just intend to be the person who will stand on these principles. You know, we avoid, for instance, country-specific resolutions at the United Nations on human rights in particular countries. In the 20 years that we have been in government, as I recall it, there are only 2 occasions on which we have moved away from that. Because there's a United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva where those issues can be dealt with, and I think you can address these things behind those bodies and work out arrangements and so on and so forth. Or if the matter is very egregious, you can go to the Security Council and you can have sanctions if they are based multilaterally on the decision of the world body, the Security Council. By just bringing a resolution to name and shame, that's a political act. And we always say, no, there's a different way to do it, except on 2 occasions. Once, when, you remember there was a story that the Syrian government, the Syrian armed forces, had used chemical weapons against their own people.
Right.
And I agonized over that. And I gave the okay to denounce the Syrian government.
But the Syrian government still stands.
Not just that. It turned out that we were sold a bill of goods by all the intelligence services, which was flawed. It was not true.
So it's something like Iraq and nuclear.
But a little lower down the totem pole, but similar. And as I say, I agonized over it because the idea of a government, this is not just persons now going with weapons and
it's horrific.
It's just.
Yeah.
And the second occasion is when the military junta took power in Myanmar after the elections, which the party supporting the military clearly lost by a landslide.
Right.
Where they took power and then they began to behave in a terrible manner. I thought that at that moment we needed to be identified on the side of the angels.
But how effective are those? Because you talk about Myanmar, and it's still the same. The status quo is still the same.
Yes, and that's why. And the point is this: there are governments friendly to some big powers who do some horrific things, to borrow your adjectival description, and they're silent on them. So, but they come with these specific human rights resolutions, which many horrific things are happening, and there are ways in which you could address them, but not necessarily in a name and shame. I was making that point, not by itself, but linking it to the question of the non-interference and no aggression against an individual country.
Is foreign policy crafted with a knowledge, or has to be crafted with a knowledge of history plus current day judgment?
Well, the way we put it is that for small countries like ourselves, foreign policies of great importance. There are some persons with an accounting mentality, a bookkeeper's mentality. That you spend $10 on foreign policy, and maybe $10 too much, you can give somebody a loaf of bread, metaphorically speaking. But they don't see the connection between the nature of the foreign policy you run and the respect in which you are held, and the way in which people would want to be in partnership with you, different countries on different matters. Look, how do we address the external environment to St. Vincent and the Grenadines is critical to what happens inside. And we have to address that in a way which is grounded in principle, grounded in the Charter of the United Nations, reflective of our values as outlined in our Constitution, the preamble to our Constitution and all our constitutional principles. And to have that engagement in a manner which enhances our capacity to address our challenges from the external environment within the interest of our own humanization. And lots of resources which come to us from the external have to do with the regard and the respect with which the country is held because of its foreign policy, and of course because of its domestic policies too. I mean, the rule of law is high in this country, press freedom, individual rights and freedoms are protected, and all the international agencies would give us high marks, and all the governments in the world give us high marks for these things, reputable governments. So that when somebody says that at independence, we have an emergent police state, I say, why do people get involved with these kind of hyperboles? It's just so false. It's beyond recognition. And they make those points for political effect. Yeah. But what they're doing really is like the man from La Mancha, the chasing after windmills. And very often they're stylizing facts in search of a theory of explanation.
Let's bring it back home. So we're going to do foreign policy, and let's talk about some of your policies that drive domestic economic growth. Private sector. What can you point to in your economic policies that empowers, enables private sector here to thrive?
First of all, a good system of governance, being part of a currency union which gives predictability, well-managed finances, the ability for foreign and for private sector to operate in a climate not of corruption. I'm not talking about an individual case where somebody who's supposed to give approval for this or that may behave in a way, and if we find any of that, we will, that's dealt with immediately. And then we have seen cases before the law courts and the like. Your property rights are respected. Your taxation has been reduced.
So is that going south?
That's going south. I mean, company taxes have gone down from 40%.
Some people say it's not south fast enough.
Yes, but it's 25% down from 40% to 30%. 15 percentage points. It's a big number. So that all of these things, there are factors which predispose investors to invest, and those which induce them.
And is your government?
And I think both the predisposing and the inducing factors. For instance, there was a time when, if you have a manufacturing enterprise,
right,
you had to pay for your spare parts, duty on your spare parts. They'll give you duty-free concessions to bring in the equipment. But spare parts, no, you had to pay on that. That's duty-free. No. In relation to your raw materials, it's also duty-free.
Right.
And it's not something which is, you apply for it, but the policy is established. You get it. All what is required is for the customs to do a check to see what you import the raw materials for.
Right.
Is being used for that particular purpose. Those are big pluses. And if you look in the, and you're head in the chamber, you will know that there are far more businesses today than in 2001. Far more persons employed in the private sector today than in 2001. There are persons who may select an individual entity which may fall. It's the nature.
And there's churn. So churn does not necessarily net out to mean
but that's the point. Yeah. That's the point. You have a few enterprises would go under for one reason or the other, and there are others which come up. There are a lot of, for instance, in the area of information technology, in the area of communications, the arts, distributive trades, new entities have come up, and nimble entities have come up and challenging some bigger ones because they're operating with less staff, they're using the modern technology, they're ordering, they bring in the goods, they're quick in moving them so that they don't have a lot of space for store to store and all the rest of it. You know that too, Tony.
Prime Minister, it's unfortunate that we have to speed along here. We haven't touched youth development, and I know you talk about your education revolution, but apart from the education revolution, how has your government embraced youth in a holistic way?
Prime, for instance, for investment, special programs for employment for young people. Yes, and set. Young people are very much concerned with sports and culture, the facilities in those respects, and opportunities. We got a letter. We got it late. 6 different persons, I think 3 different coaches sent. Lord of Mercy is one, Godfrey Harry is another coach, I can't remember the name of that. These are students who are going to to the G.C. Foster School in Jamaica. They'll do an associate degree and they get training in sports, athletics, whatever the field is. We have a policy that if you play a sport for St. Vincent and the Grenadines nationally, you must either be at school or in work.
Right.
There are some examples which are just magnificent. You take for instance, someone whom we recruited from the university at the West Indies to go to the Security Council for the 2 years. She holds the rank of an ambassador.
Right.
Halima Deschamps,
Correct.
who she was about for 3 years and so on, had entry qualifications to go to university. She couldn't go to university because the family didn't have it. But she had leadership qualities. She had entry qualifications for university. She didn't get one of the 4 scholarships or whatever. You notice, this year alone, we have given 540 tuition scholarships. Last year, on the basis of the CAPE results, we gave 60 national scholarship, national exhibitions, special awards, and bursaries on the basis of the CAPE and the associate degree results. We are not going to, Tony, cut back on scholarships, as some countries in the region have done, including countries which have far more natural resources than we have.
You're very much
the
administration that looks at youth development.
Look at the sports facilities. Look at Diamond. Look at what we did. And every time we do these things, we get opposition. When we are spending $50-odd million on the World Cup at to fix up the fields at the time, not just Arnhem, but other places too. It was criticized. Oh, you're not going to get World Cup games. What are you doing that for? But you use the opportunity, particularly since developers in stadia or in the region,
right,
to get the benefit of that. The sports facilities throughout the country, the way the National Sports Council, and you can bring for me that there's a playing field somewhere which they should be fixing and they ain't fixed. And I will say to you, that should be done. That's a question as to why is the reason they haven't gotten that done. I don't know if they don't have the resources there, they haven't put their plans in place. National Lottery used to gross revenues under $10 million. They're now knocking their head up to $100 million.
Excellent. Before we finish,
and then and during this period of suffering and COVID, we are looking especially at the concerns of the young people, the education, and something that is paining me that they're not at school.
It's paining every parent as well. But I know those challenges, and we don't have the time to talk about COVID because that's another program.
And I would love to come to talk about it.
Yes, another program all by itself. The bank. I had to get this one in. Is this monopolistic? BOSBG taking over the next biggest bank in Simmons, I believe. Is it monopolistic? Is it going to provide a basis for some aggressive initiatives to get the private sector going? Because there's going to be far more liquidity on the one entity. What's the game here,
Tony? We have a policy of the government is, as far as practicable, to build and amalgamate indigenous banks within and across the region. And we have been doing that. We have been in the forefront of starting up ECAB, Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank. Stanford's onshore bank, which is the Bank of Antigua, that's the name of it. It's the biggest bank now, I think, in Antigua and Barbuda. And we from National Commercial Bank in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We and this man who talking to you were instrumental in getting that off the ground, in conjunction with the governor of the central bank, Sir Dwight Venner, my friend of blessed memory. The First Caribbean, CIBC First Caribbean, sought to sell to a prospective purchaser from in Latin America, and that didn't wash.
Okay.
For various reasons. What do you do? Do you let, in these countries, certainly in St. Vincent, that CIB become nothing but a postbox for Barbados, for the bank in Barbados? You know, if you're going there to get a mortgage, how long you have to take before it's reviewed in Barbados and so on. If you as a business person to put a loan in, go for a loan and so on and so forth. It's ridiculous. The good thing about the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and how it is configured, though the government owns
significant
62%
yes,
through the NIS and the government. It has 20% Eastern Caribbean Financial Holdings, which is a major shareholder of the Bank of St. Lucia.
Right.
And we wanted to go to an amalgamation with the Bank of St. Lucia. Remember when we sold them 51%?
I remember that.
Eastern Caribbean Financial Holdings, and then when Chastity came into office in St. Lucia, and they were thinking of going with a bank in Trinidad, and I tell them absolutely not, because we had had our experiences with certain financial institutions out of Trinidad, and we saw some problems and so on and so on. And we say we'll buy back all the 51% shares, and we set the price. They say, well, look, could you just buy 31 percentage points of the 51, leave us with 20? I say, fine. So the Bank of St. Lucia has a voice there. I mean, the Eastern Caribbean Financial Holdings has a voice there. And about 18% or so of the shares, 18%, owned by Vincentians.
And are you going to divest more of government shares?
If Vincentians are interested, I will divest more. Look, Tony, I've made the point repeatedly. Small, undercapitalized, standalone banks are anachronistic.
Can't make it in this modern.
And then when you had a global economic crisis of capitalism in 2008 and following, where the small, standalone, undercapitalized bank, National Commercial Bank then, which was faced with a liquidity problem, because when it had a lot of liquidity, with lots of money coming in, it masked the extent of the undercapitalization.
So are you going to go on a drive? Because, I mean, we're really dangerously running into a lot of time here, but you've identified the vulnerability of these small, undercapitalized banks. Is it your policy now to sort of absorb them eventually?
You mean the only one which remain in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? No, because you know there's I understand that there's the Co-op Bank is in discussion with other institutions regionally.
Because I was going to talk about them.
Yeah.
So and I don't. First St. Vincent Bank,
and then the only other one is First St. Vincent Bank, which is a relatively small bank. And I don't want to talk about any individual bank, but you know, they have their own clientele, their own purpose, and so forth. But small standalone banks, well, those banks are really savings banks. They're not They don't do external transactions.
But they have to come under the scrutiny of the FSA. I mean, you've got...
They come under the FSA and they also come under the, the central bank.
How is the depositor protected? You see, because if they're small,
that's
vulnerable.
That's an issue which we are cognizant of the issues. And the regulators are cognizant of the issues, and the regulators take certain steps. It's not for me in an interview of this kind to talk about any particular set of problems.
One last question before I invite final comments. I said we were going to talk about COVID, but I'm going to ask you just one question on COVID. Sure. How serious are you about the SRNO that you just put out there?
SNR number 28 of 2001, very serious.
It's not a bluff.
No. Look, Tony, there are certain categories of employees. They know, because of the extent of their interface with the public, that they should, or their strategic importance within the delivery of governmental services, that they must have the vaccine. The nurses, and doctors, people in the health services, the police, the prisoners, the prison service, the prison officers, airport and seaport, including customs and immigration, teachers, and of course in the government, the central government services. You can't have permanent secretaries and heads of departments or chief technical officers who will be overseeing government policy in this area themselves not vaccinated. And you're given a choice to take the jab or work elsewhere, save and accept if you are if you have an exemption on and both exemptions are very narrowly defined in terms of the fact-based health exemption. Some people think that if they just a doctor write up a piece of paper, tell them that's not how it goes.
Right.
But the regulations make it plain as to how you need to go about that. Or a deeply held religious objection, and just objecting on religious grounds, not going to give you the exemption because the employer must have an accommodation which they can make for you if they don't have that accommodation.
So all this is spelled out in
all of this is spelled out in the regulations.
Right.
There are different processes. Public servants and teachers and nurses have one set of processes. The police, because of the nature of the Police Act, they have a different set of processes. But we are quite serious about it.
So you're very serious, right?
Now, and I just say this. In mid-July, less than 20% of the nurses and the hospital services were vaccinated. A week ago, 59% were vaccinated.
So the numbers are rising.
In the community nursing services, in mid-July, 1/5 were vaccinated. 64% a week ago were vaccinated. The police was probably around, 12, 15% in mid-July. They're now over 50%. Similarly, the teachers. So persons are seeing the importance. As I see it with the COVID, there are three categories. There are the anti-vaxxers,
the hesitant people,
the anti-vaxxers, and the permanently vaccine hesitant, who objectively are in the same category as the anti-vaxxers. And then there are the hesitants, who are waiting, are seeing, like, take it, but I already yet. They are not anti-vax and they're not permanently hesitant. And that group, more and more, They see what is happening in the real world, and they're making their decisions. But government cannot be a continuing university seminar. Right. Decisions have to be made because we have to get back to some sense of normalcy. So the way I see it, if we have these categories, taking the vaccine to a number, 80%, 90%, some may decide, I understand some have already said, well, I'm prepared to go home. Well, that's an individual's choice. I mean, I am not in the face of that particular kind of choice. And then the private sector is also doing its work.
Its own drive.
So hopefully we will get to a place where before people were talking about 70% with the common, ordinary garden variety of COVID.
Now with the variants.
Now with the variants, I think we have to up the number to something around 90%.
Right.
Thereabouts. And because unless we do that, and we have to resolve that at independence in our own minds and hearts. And please, as I leave with this discussion, don't be seduced by this imported slogan, my body, my choice. Because that is the slogan of the absolutist abortion on demand persons. And a number of religious persons, I say, fundamental Christians, some of them say, my body, my choice. I wonder if they know what they're accepting philosophically. And they say, my body, my choice, in relation to same-sex marriages.
Yes.
You know, there are some people who think that a society is just an aggregation of atomized individuals. Well, that's not a society. The very nature of a society, you are social individuals. You act in relation to one another. And to go to the most basic foundation, and we're recording this on a Sunday, that's why Christ made it plain, Jesus Christ made it plain, about the importance of the commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. And he went on to say, you cannot, how can you love me, whom you don't see, and don't love your neighbor?
Right.
You have to love your neighbor. You're not just an individual by yourself.
Yeah, and the whole aspect of public health is
that's why it's called public health.
Exactly. It's about us as
a community.
As a community. Prime Minister, I'm now going to ask you to tell me the good news and we're going back to our 42 years of independence. Let's look into the future. What's the good news for young people up ahead? What's the good news for the not so young, okay, and the unborn?
Well, the young persons and the unborn, I say to them, well, the unborn, I can't talk to them, but the young persons, I say to them, and when those who are born, as they grow up, their families would tell them, develop your God-given abilities and talents. Don't hide them. Don't bury them. Develop those talents. And the best way to develop those talents is by education and training. If you think today you have to be competitive in terms of skills and get the appropriate education and skills to function in a modern economy and society, wait till it's reached 2050. I wouldn't be around. I'd be dead by then. Most persons who are listening to me because they're younger than me are likely to know of my death. So that I put it in those terms. I don't want to be morbid or anything. I'm just recognizing life.
Yes.
And living and death. And take all the opportunities available now, and they're abundant, to train, to educate, to be disciplined. And here in the Caribbean, we have a certain joy of life and living, but you have to do it with a serious base. For those persons who missed out on the formal aspects of the education revolution because they were already older, and I'm talking about persons now in their 40s.
Right.
Look, the opportunities for you still to do your training on the job, the distance, and so on. There are opportunities to set up your business. There are Prime, there are other support systems. St. Vincent Grenadines is not the only place. We have good arrangements with the OECS and CARICOM with all the regional arrangements, and the world is there. But this is your base, and this is your home. This is the land of your birth. This is the place which you're attached to. You have a sense of belonging to it. We have opportunities. Look, the job creation right now, despite all with COVID and lasso frere, we have 500 persons. We start the selection for people to go overseas.
This is with Sandals.
Sandals, they're starting up to recruit for 900 people with the construction.
Yes.
And then after that, a 350-room hotel, 3 persons per room. So you're talking over 1,000 persons.
You think we're going to come to a situation where there's going to be a labor shortage?
There could be. There could be. There could be. Then we see the other hotels are starting up. We see what happened in Royal Mill. We see what is being done at Diamond, the infrastructure being put down there for that. We see the advertisement made for the restaurant out there too, which would be operated
rainforest and so on.
Seafoods, the Marriott. We should which this has to get a kickstart back. The one at Peter's Hope,
right?
The Black Sands. We see what is happening with the airlines. We see the progress there already. I mean, on Wednesday gone, you had 2 CAL flights, underground international flights. You had American.
And you had Virgin.
And you had Virgin. And Canada is coming back. I understand that early December, they should have been coming early November, but I understand they put off for a month because people who want to go back to Canada haven't had their second dose, or they haven't taken their first dose, because to enter Canada,
you have to be fully vaxxed.
You have to be fully vaxxed. So all those reasons why we can't shoot ourselves in the foot. So there are the opportunities dealing with the port. There are a lot of construction work going on currently. Housing is going to be a big thing. It is a big thing at the moment to the end of this year and into the whole of next year for the rebuilding of homes for persons, the repairs.
So you're sounding very optimistic.
Oh, I am. But the big problem, there are four downsides. These are the risks, the downside risks.
Right.
First of all, we don't get another big natural disaster in the next 12 months.
Right.
Secondly, I mean, we can cope with something small, but not a big natural disaster.
Right.
Secondly, we have to get COVID under control.
We have to get that under control.
Which means fundamentally the vaccine uptake plus using all the other
protocols.
Thirdly, we don't have globally
a meltdown.
Any meltdown. And fourthly, we ourselves, as a people, both in the private sector and the public sector, the plans that we have, we implement them in the most optimal manner, which means everybody is on board. Not this talk by people on the opposition saying, let us have a kumbaya on COVID. A kumbaya for us to talk and feel good on COVID. To what effect? To dilute the message? What we have when their position is diametrically opposed to ours. So the point is this: people have to unite on clearly sensible goals going forward, and if organizations to which they have historically been attached talking all foolishness, just have to say, well, bye-bye. I'm only going to link where people are interested in my country, my family, individually, and you guys with your own individual agendas and follies and so forth.
Right.
I'm not going to be part of you.
So I get that, and I'm going to bring this to an end, and I'm going to ask you, give you the opportunity when this program airs. It's going to be, we said we were recording on Sunday, that's correct, but when the program airs, we're going to be on the eve of our 42nd anniversary of independence. So I'm going to give you this opportunity to bring the nation independence greetings.
Well, you would have seen my published message in the newspapers, and it's online. And I will speak directly to the nation 9 o'clock on Independence Day. The analysis which I'm offering is that we are in difficult, challenging, perilous, uncertain times. But we have residents in us, a resilience, and their many strengths and possibilities, despite the weaknesses and limitations. And what we have to do is to extol social solidarity, to have faith, to have accompanying works to that faith. And whatever we do, we must be disciplined, we must be focused, and those who are leading must deliver quality leadership. You know, I was listening recently, the young persons may know this, the older one may not. This British singer Adele brought out a new song recently, well, after about 4 years. Quite a good song, actually. I've listened to it very carefully. I've seen the video, called Easy on Me. She said, you know, the river doesn't have the gold, in which she had been washing her hands, putting her hands all the time. But that the waters contain hope. But that hope has to be joined with love and faith. And the faith has to be linked with works. That's all where social solidarity comes in.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for being my
Happy
guest.
Independence.
Thank you very much for being my guest on this special edition. It's going to be a part 1 and a part 2 of Let's Get Down to Business. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been looking at Let's Get Down to Business. My guest, very special guest, was the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Do join us the next time Let's Get Down to Business airs.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered by a company owned by Exemption that understands your unique insurance needs? At Metrocint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocint General Insurance Company.
As a doctor and first responder in the fight against COVID-19, we use the N95 mask to protect ourselves and our patients. We are therefore asking you, the public, not to use or abuse the N95 mask. They are exclusively for medical and nursing personnel. Help us to save you and to save ourselves.
Hey everyone, this is Jill from the Shade Room saying happy 42nd Independence to you, SVG, on behalf of Boom 1069.
Home of the blessed Saint Vincent, Saint Vincent, Saint Vincent, I love